The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 13:11 The Spar Eye. It was so basic, Cornelius said. You have to educate the student, just enough that they know what not to do, but not enough that they don't have to think for themselves. Ensure a healthy diet. Ensure rigorous training. Make sure the student has a consistent, focused drive to excel. Give them enough real-world experience that they can rationalize their growth, and compare it, but not so much that they think they've become experts. The actual document was 112 pages long, and created the absolute perfect scenario that would be required to achieve perfection. The amount of detail he went into was so extreme. If he were alive, I would have asked him if he was trying to be meticulous, or trying to prove that perfection was impossible. But he was dead, so instead I took a different meaning to his work. If a mere mortal, with his limited mental capacity and slow speed of thought, could come up with such a detailed plan for perfection, then I could come up with an even more detailed plan following the same pattern. Then all I had to do was find a way to make it happen. Quite a long story there, Lex pointed out as he began to stretch his body. Cornelius, standing at a distance, still only had the strength of a mortal, but there was something about his demeanor that made Lex feel like he was a very serious thought. Do you know what makes perfection, Lex? I know the question sounds different from my original question about the origin of strength, but you see, they both have the same answer. Perfection is not a singular state. It is an aggregate of countless individual things done perfectly. It is the same with strength. How you trained your body at the mortal realm affected your limits in the chi training realm. How far you pushed yourself in chi training affects the kind of foundation you have. The limits of your foundation determine the kind of core you can tolerate, and that can influence the strength and energy pool of your nascent soul. How powerful your nascent soul is then determines how quickly and easily you can sense laws, which in turn determines how effective your tenets are. Wait, said Lex, suddenly interrupting him. I thought all tenets were the same, and there was no distinct advantage of one tenet over another. That is true. Tenets, in themselves, are equal, but the quality of the tenet you build is definitely not. That, as I said, is determined, among other things, by the quality of your nascent soul. The quality of your nascent soul, in turn, comes back down to the quality of your body tempering, and the effect of your body tempering comes down to, not only your cultivation technique, but also your aim. Are you aiming just to shoot the target of achieving body tempering, or are you aiming for a greater target than that, a harder target to achieve? Lex could see nothing. His eyes were drawn to Cornelius, the only visible thing standing in front of an eternal abyss. At the same time, his body was giving off such an immensely powerful aura that Lex felt compelled to look away. Did you end up building a tenet of perfection or something like that? Lex could not help but ask as he pulled out Naraka. He was having trouble believing that even after all his countless advantages, someone in the same realm could threaten him this way. Then again, it was Mary who mentioned Cornelius as an example of a very powerful earth immortal. Cornelius chuckled. Not quite. Then he put on his gloves, and aimed the bow towards Lex. Get ready, I'm going to shoot. Don't hold back, Lex said, so Cornelius didn't. Lex never saw the arrow fly. He just felt it smash into his chest, launching him across the mountain range. The spar had begun. Chapter 13:12 The Spar 2. It was not that the arrow was too fast for Lex to detect, but rather that Cornelius didn't use a normal arrow to begin with. So far, whenever Lex fought another immortal, he had the advantage because they would try to use their control over laws to influence Lex. However, owing to the fact that he had a Tao-level ingredient in his body, among other things, affecting the laws of his body was easier said than done. He in turn, could affect his opponents however he wanted, or even rely on his many other abilities to gain the advantage. But Cornelius launched an arrow targeting not him, but laws. Those laws did not try to change anything about him. Instead, he just felt the law of physical force smash his chest with the strength of a missile large enough to wipe out a city. In essence, the laws were not changing anything about him. Instead, they were directly acting on him. The distinction was minor, but the point was that it worked. Lex was, of course, not harmed by the initial impact, but he quickly began to suspect that that wasn't the point of the attack. Instead of crashing into the mountain range, he fell into an ocean of thick, viscous liquid that quickly absorbed all his momentum. Yet at the same time, the liquid offered so much resistance that Lex found it difficult to move. It was also beginning to lower his body temperature. Before the situation could progress, Lex activated his own tenet. Though he was taken by surprise, that did not mean he was a pushover. He was not familiar with this liquid, and the laws governing it were unfamiliar as well, though he was certain his left eye could reveal the details. He was, however, familiar with the effects of temperature, and the laws of it as well. The liquid began to boil all around him, suddenly becoming very runny, allowing him the freedom to move once more. He was about to launch a salvo of golden inferno when his eyes widened. His instincts warned him of coming danger, but for once they had no suggestion for how to escape. As if there was some hidden catalyst, the liquid that surrounded quickly started turning to gas, becoming ever hotter. The heat was not the problem, since Lex was mostly immune to heat. No, the problem was that the laws began acting on their own, rapidly increasing the heat way more than he intended, causing a huge drain on his tenet. The worst part was that he was unable to detach his tenet from the law. Clearly, something was amiss. Lex summoned his sword intent, as strongly as he could, and slashed at the gas that was closely sticking to his body, cleaving an open path for his escape. At the same time, he activated his left eye to study the laws to see what was going on. Lex repeated Cornelius' words, and used the one advantage he was certain he had over Cornelius. He used his raw, physical strength. Once upon a time, Lex was stronger than everyone and everything within the same realm as him because he kept training atop a dragon, and kept absorbing its strength. Then he gained the heart of a dragon, and his strength multiplied. The ground underneath him shattered into fine dust, forming a massive crater as Lex shot forward at his fastest speed, causing multiple sonic booms. Cornelius, who was keeping a close eye on Lex, barely caught sight of what happened. One moment, Lex was acting cool, throwing his own words back at him, and the next moment there was a fist breaking through the visor of his helmet. For the first time in a long time, Cornelius' nose broke as his body shot through the air at supersonic speeds, crashing into, and through the mountain. Instead of pursuing him, Lex grabbed Naraka with both hands and used the first move of the sword technique given to him by the governor of the Origin realm. The 10 Tribulation sword technique, which incorporated sword intent and lightning, was far from easy to learn, even for Lex, but he'd gained a basic understanding of the first move. Now, he was going to use it for the first time. The veins on Lex's arm became visible as he concentrated his strength into his sword, and channeled his sword intent into Naraka. The sword, in turn, let out an eager screech that cut through the air. Cornelius' body finally landed in the ground, the momentum from the attack finally ending, when Lex unleashed the first move. Chapter 13:13 Spar 3. More and more, Lex began to notice that his sword intent was white in color. At first he used to think it was just bright flashes of light, but the pattern was too consistent for it to be anything else. Anytime he attacked with his sword intent, the white flash of light was his sword intent. So when he used the first move of 10 Tribulations, there was yet another flash of white light, this time it appeared in the shape of an electric arc, reaching out to Cornelius. The king, who had only just landed from Lex's attack, raised a shield he summoned to block, trying to buy himself time, but it was for naught. The shield broke and his armor was cut through, leaving a massive red gash across his chest. The king tried to groan, but before the sound could leave his mouth, he felt the suffocating pressure of a domain once more. His eyes narrowed and he activated a technique, only for the domain to cancel it out. Another one of Lex's fists smashed into him, but before he could fly off to the other end of the mountain range, Lex grabbed his leg and pulled him back. "Don't push your luck, kid," Cornelius said, and activated an ability. Though within a small distance of Lex, all laws were pushed out, Cornelius was wearing armor which itself contained trapped laws. Items containing laws were incredibly valuable, and even immortals couldn't just create them as they wished, so which is why immortals valued them. They came in handy during exactly such wars of law. Lex felt a push, forcing him to release his grip, catching him by surprise. His physical strength was no joke, so forcing him to do anything was incredible. Unfortunately, that brief moment was all the gap Cornelius needed to slip out of Lex's domain. He immediately pulled out his bow and shot a real, physical arrow at Lex, except that time, instead of harming his body, it fused into it. Immediately Lex felt like his tenet was wrapped in chains, making it impossible for him to move it. Before he could figure out a way to unravel the chain, Cornelius attacked again. That action, taken by Lex, seemed to be the wrong move, which aggravated the bog even more, massively increasing his karmic debt and pulling him in deeper, except that Lex was being held back by Cornelius, who himself was resisting being pulled in from the chain. Very smart, he had only begun his response when it started raining a thick, viscous liquid atop him like a cloud burst, almost drowning him. Although it was not the same as his own attack, it was effectively the same. Cornelius immediately used his extreme familiarity with laws to change his environment, but Lex countered just as quickly with his eye ability. The two quickly began attacking each other, going back and forth with their abilities. In truth, though their battle seemed devastating, and had in fact already destroyed their environment, neither Lex nor Cornelius were going all out. After all, if Lex used domination, then even without his tenet, the laws would bend to his will. Cornelius, too, was no doubt holding back. This was, after all, just a spar. Lex's goal had never been to defeat Cornelius, but to learn from him, and he was learning much. But after an exchange of about 1,000 moves, Lex didn't like the fact that he was constantly at a disadvantage against Cornelius, so he decided to get just a little more serious. Other than laws, one of immortals' most important weapons was the kinds of energy they could manipulate. Well, once upon a time, when Lex was in the Temple of Fasting, Cassandra had taught him how to manipulate divine energy. He never used it too seriously, save to fight Ra. Now, on an impulse, he decided to see just how effective it could be. He summoned his butter knife, the one imbued with divine energy, and flipped the board. Chapter 13-14 Spar 4. Lex had long ago learned how to manipulate divine energy, but it was scarcely useful except against Ra. There was also the fact that Lex could not produce divine energy out of thin air, and his only source was the butter knife. He typically avoided using it, since the divine energy from his mask and knife would only replenish based on the people who followed the deity of the butter knife, and the invincible tyrant. But it was better to get the hang of it before he needed it, so now was as good a time as any. The first part of using divine energy was to enhance his body and his attacks, and only the second level of using it was to make use of its completely magical properties to bring about various changes. Unlike Cornelius, Lex did not have any lawcrafts that he already knew how to construct, so instead of overwhelming changes, he was going to use divine energy to subtly affect the world around him. The fight almost immediately took a turn, with Lex finally gaining an advantage. The laws that would target him would end up missing him, and unexpected accidents kept happening around him, not weakening Cornelius' attacks in any way, but just giving Lex a convenient exit. But the advantage was not decisive. Considering he had spent the majority of his life immortal, the importance of physical strength was always apparent to him. Sometimes, sheer brute strength could overcome what clever tactics could not, and it could drastically change the outcome of any battle. That was why Lex was pretty proud of his strength. But facing Cornelius, as long as he did not completely restrict Cornelius' control over laws, it was useless. Cornelius maintained his distance, using either laws or his bow to attack Lex, all to stay outside the range of his domain, which meant that when Lex tried to punch him, Cornelius would just put up a wall of air containing the exact same amount of strength as his punch, perfectly negating it. Lex felt the same chains that locked his tenet wrap itself around all the laws around him. But instead of holding them in place, the chains were guiding them towards a certain outcome. Even the laws in immortal Aegis were affected, though they were resisting. There was an explosion, but not in the kind that Lex was used to, or even expected. Immortal Aegis, his strongest shield, could protect him from normal attacks from a specific direction, but it could do nothing about it if his entire environment was changing. This was the strongest lawcraft Lex had seen yet. The mountain range vanished, but not because it disappeared. No, it transformed. The rocks and the dirt and the soil all merged together, affected by countless laws, to form the most pristine, unblemished marble floors, while grand, white pillars rose from the ground as if to support the sky. Metallic dishes hung from the air, with each sat a soulbird, lighting it. In front of Lex, an enormous throne appeared, tens of thousands of feet large, and it was the presence of that throne which was so overbearing that it caused an explosion or aura. As all of this happened, Immortal Aegis remained in front of Lex, as if taunting him, reminding him that the way he thought about the world, and about combat was still deeply entrenched in the habits of mortals. A shield could protect him from an attack, an impact, perhaps even explosions of stars and planets out in the origin realm, but it could do nothing for him right now. Cornelius appeared before Lex, though this time as a giant, sitting on the throne before him. Lex suddenly felt a strong feeling of being a plebeian, a mere mongrel, groveling in front of a mighty and powerful king. He felt an urge to kneel. He could tell that his feelings were being influenced by his surroundings. They were incredibly powerful, and perhaps if it was anyone else, they would not have been able to resist. But from deep within his dragon's heart, Lex felt an incredible reluctance, which was quickly turning to rage. Of course, even if Lex didn't have a dragon's heart, much like how Cornelius had tempered himself in the gauntlet of war, Lex had been tempered through the gauntlet of his incredibly bad luck. His will was not so easily challenged. Domination erupted from his body. Chapter 13-15 end. The two clashed. Not in the way they had been before. It was not a clash of words, or fists, or laws. This was a clash of auras. Among humans, Lex had never encountered anyone who could command aura with the same flexibility and depth as he did, mainly because he took his aura skills from a dragon. Yet in Cornelius, he found a worthy adversary. The man had honed his will, had honed his power, and had honed his very being through a very purposeful and deliberate lifestyle. Although he was a couple hundred years older than Lex, considering all the flaws and drawbacks of humans, it was actually quite exceptional that Cornelius was able to reach so far in such a short amount of time, especially without the numerous advantages that Lex had. Sure, Cornelius joined Ventura, but that was not the same as having an all-powerful system. Much like how Lex had decided to venture onto a path of supremacy, and aim for the very peak of the universe, Cornelius too must have had his eyes set on an impossible goal. It was not like he was lacking enemies either, so the pressure on him was immense. Without cheats, he had to come up with his own way to gain immense power, which is probably why he was focusing on questions like where does strength come from, and how to achieve perfection. Lex respected his drive, but that did not mean he was ready to kneel to the man. Their auras clashed directly, and to his genuine and immense surprise, Lex did not win the competition of auras outright. Domination was not to be denied. It bent the laws to its will, but the illusion of Cornelius did not. The urge to bend the knee in front of Cornelius retreated, but for some reasons, it could not oppress Cornelius either. Lex and Cornelius faced each other, Lex a tiny figure, Cornelius a mighty king. They clashed, the mere seated human, and the being who forcefully harnessed the power of the dragons. They clashed, two titans in their own right, unyielding, uncompromising. She's in closed-door cultivation, I won't be able to talk to her for a while, Lex said, though he noticed something odd. Cornelius' statement did not flow according to the normal rhythm of the conversation. Upon hearing that the sword technique came from a Tao Lord, he should have asked about it or commented on it, or maybe even asked about the Tao Lord. Instead, he told him to discuss his cultivation with Cassandra. Lex's eyes flashed in understanding, but he did not say anything. Why are you limiting yourself to the 7th level of the immortal realm? Even if you don't want to become a heavenly immortal, isn't it best to wait at the 9th level? Cornelius shrugged. I'm using a special mention to stop my tribulations. If I get rid of it, they won't stop until I reach the heavenly immortal realm. They'll come one after another. I'm not ready to leave the crystal realm just yet. I've heard that the examinees want to raise the highest cultivation level of the immortal realm to the heavenly immortal. If they do that, will you get rid of your limit? Cornelius smiled upon hearing that. Yes, I will. But if they manage to raise the limit to heavenly immortal, I would be extremely grateful to them, for then I won't even need to face them myself. Vinii will rule the realm. Is he stronger than you? Lex asked, curiously. One-on-one? I'm not sure. But he leads every monster in this realm, which will include countless heavenly immortals the moment the realm allows it. An army of hundreds of thousands of earth immortals? I can believe it. The same for heavenly immortals? Even Ventura cannot casually pull that off with a branch as random as chaotic gold. Come, let's go back. I'll share the details with you about the Craven Prince. Thanks. By the way, you want my help healing your wound? It looks painful. Chapter 13:16 Hellions. Cornelius looked down at his chest and observed the terrible gash on his chest. It was continuously bleeding, as if something was stopping his blood from coagulating. He could feel the sword intent, still continuously cutting his flesh. Yeah, it'd be great if you could heal this, Cornelius said. There was no need to be arrogant. An attack designed by a Tao Lord was far from simple, even if Lex hadn't completely mastered it. Lex extended his finger and touched Cornelius' chest, channeling his healing techniques while withdrawing any lingering traces of his own energy from the wound. This was the first time he'd used the 10 Tribulations attack, and it was his only attack that ended up reaching Cornelius. While that was a clear indication of how powerful the attack was in itself, it was also a benchmark for the kind of power Lex could be using, but wasn't able to. NOV/LB/JNN. It only took a few minutes for Cornelius' wounds to heal, which was a testament to Lex's healing capabilities more than anything. But for once, after a very long time, Lex didn't feel like his abilities were anything all that great. After all his numerous advantages, he was only Cornelius' equal, and that too in a spar. Who knew what would have happened if they fought for real? It was actually quite hilarious that in the Crystal Realm Lex encountered a human who was his equal, but in the Champions tourney every immortal he faced was merely a slight obstruction at best. Cornelius teleported them back to his castle, and pulled out a crystal. Cornelius nodded. Precisely. The only relatively good news I can share is that the examinees are not necessarily united. There will be competition between them for the top few ranks, so they won't necessarily work together, and might even sabotage one another. But those are all just possibilities. Also, there is still a possibility that there might be examinees from other races, but I have yet to encounter any. Communication between the Crystal Realm races is also at an all-time low, considering no one can know when one might betray the other. Is there anything else you think I need to watch out for? Lex asked, ready to set off. He did not want to rush into an assassination, but he also did not want to delay matters any longer. The best outcome would be to finish this entire thing undetected, since he wanted to avoid getting involved with these examinees. But unless he was able to eliminate his target in one hit like he was planning, it was an inevitability. Yes, watch out for the Crystal Race. They've been acting oddly ever since they became involved in the war. It's clear that many of their members are not happy to be forced to join, and even Azel and Firen, the progenitors of the Frio and Soul birds, have left their domain. They might end up doing something unexpected, so keep your distance if you can. Is there anyone I can trust? Lex asked. If you need my help with anything, you can let me know. If you end up in a situation where you might need to trust someone else, then the Trollops are your next best bet. After the Crystal Race and monsters, I think it's the Trollops who are the strongest in this realm, which is why the examinees have been targeting them the most. I just have one last question, Lex said. If I end up facing the examinees, and we get into a fight, will Ventura come after me? No, all things considered, you're an Earth immortal, so even if you kill them, Ventura won't come after you. Private grudges, however, are something you'll still have to look out for. Chapter 13:17 Sneaking In. Lex grabbed everything that Cornelius had to offer him, and after a short farewell, he left. Although Lex initially developed a poor impression of the man for being a hedonistic king, the man's strength had earned his respect. As for his personal preferences, Lex tried not to think about it. Lex teleported to a random cafe in the capital, grabbed a drink and took a seat while he planned his next steps. Even though Cornelius hadn't given him the exact coordinates for the Craven capital, he could get close. From there he would have to search himself. Belial, the Craven prince, took his security very seriously and consistently moved around with a guard, and though he could no longer spend his time in the panic room, he remained in the heavily guarded capital, never leaving. Lex would need to find the place while maintaining complete stealth, infiltrate it and then find a way to kill Belial. Escaping would be the easiest part of all this. Despite everything Cornelius had told him about the examinees, Lex did not want to get involved at all. He was leaving all these problems behind to become a good little innkeeper. He would take care of his guests, and manage his property. He was done interfering with other problems. Although he felt bad for what was happening to the Crystal Realm, if he didn't take care of the Midnight Realm then it too would one day become like this. More importantly, he was nowhere near strong enough to single-handedly resolve this whole issue. With his plan more or less decided, he left a gold coin on the table and left, enchanting it so that strangers could not pick it up, and only the cafe staff could. There were clear drains made in all the tunnels, and for good reason. They weren't for rain, but to collect the slime that dripped off Craven's bodies. Resisting the urge to pass a derogatory comment, Lex explored the base and discovered that it was merely some kind of temporary barracks. There were only a few Craven inside, guarding the place, and they were in the Golden Core realm so Lex had no problem carefully reading their memories. The capital was indeed nearby. It was a mere 98,000 miles from their current location. Although that sounded like a lot, and actually was a lot, Lex could now unironically say that it wasn't so far. He didn't even need to teleport. Putting his hands in his pockets, Lex just continued to walk at the same pace as before, making sure to remain hidden and to not leave behind a trail. Before long, Lex found himself in front of a giant crater that led to the underground capital of the Craven. The problem was, the crater did not seem like a regular opening to the city. No, this looked like the crater that was formed when a meteor fell from the sky onto a planet. Considering that there was a distinct lack of any guards or security, it was safe to say that something had surely happened to the Craven capital. Lex jumped inside. Chapter 13:18 I just said I don't want to get involved. It became clear, almost immediately, that the capital had suffered some kind of blast. The way that the tunnels had collapsed, the way the walls were charred, and the way that the rubble had fallen made it apparent that someone had dropped a bomb inside the hole and then had blown it up. Fortunately, or unfortunately, this seemed like the explosion wasn't recent. There were clear signs of repairs to a few tunnels, and of Craven moving through them. It seemed like this place had been evacuated since the time of the explosion. But just because the place was abandoned did not mean Lex lowered his guards. He felt a subtle warning from his instincts letting him know that there was some kind of hidden danger in this place. Considering that this was the former capital of the race invading a whole realm, it would be surprising if it was just left alone. The problem Lex was currently facing was that he had no idea where the Craven had relocated to. There were no signs of movement outside the crater, and if they teleported away it was so long ago that there were no more signs left. Lex was certain if he looked around he'd eventually find someone who knew something, but it was worth checking out the ruins of the capital as well. He went deeper through the clearly repaired tunnels, entering his soul state to go directly through a few sections that had collapsed, until he eventually reached deep enough into the city where it was no longer directly destroyed from the impact. Even so, the halls looked like they were going to collapse at any given moment. The rooms all looked too cramped to support the Craven, so it must be. Lex narrowed his eyes and observed the rooms more closely. From what Cornelius told him, the nobles and royals of the Craven had smaller bodies, which would be the only ones that could fit into those rooms. It was not that the laws had changed from behaving normally that was irritating him. Instead, his tenant felt like by leaving the laws twisted and tainted in such a way, for whatever reason, was like leaving behind their mark. Of course, Lex himself could tell that whoever had done this had probably done so for another, more materialistic reason than just leaving behind their mark. That was usually more overt. But to his tenet, it was like a testament of their victory and, more important, supremacy. It wanted the mark gone, the laws returned to normal. Doing so wouldn't be difficult for him. But before he did that, he wanted to see what this was all about. His tenet reached out, not to the twisted laws, but to the facade hiding the change. This was a very high-level illusion for it to affect his sense of laws rather than reality. It was specifically targeting immortals, and if his tenet hadn't reacted to it, even with his powerful eyes, he would have been fooled. Like a shattered mirror, the facade broke under the slightest touch of his tenet, revealing the macabre reality underneath. Even the cavern, which seemed ordinary up until now, changed. In fact, the entire underground city experienced a change. The entire ruins were stained black, and it was not from charring. Instead, Lex could tell that it was blood. The entire city had been washed in craven blood, and here, in this cavern, something sinister had taken place which required all that blood. As his eyes looked at the twisted laws, he finally understood what had happened. There had been a mass blood ritual here, using the blood of countless craven to give birth to the abnormality in the laws. What was worse was that the longer the abnormality remained hidden, the stronger the corruption would become. I just promised not to get involved, Lex complained to himself as he slowly understood what was happening. The deformation seemed so unnatural because the laws of this realm were forcibly being changed to match that of another realm. There was a fragment of another realm in the heart of the change, and it was eating up the laws of the crystal realm, slowly replacing them with others. No wonder his tenet was offended. This was not just a mark, but one realm claiming supremacy over another. Chapter 13:19 Precautions. Lex stood there, looking at the twisting, corrupted laws, and he tried to wrap his head around what the reason for this was. There was a very straightforward one. The Ventura exam asked the students to raise the upper threshold from earth immortal to heavenly immortal. Previously, Lex thought that by killing countless immortals, they were using their corpses as fertilizer to help grow the realm. Now, however, he got the sense that the corpses were still fertilizer, but not to grow the realm. Instead, his latest suspicion was that they were trying to replace the laws of the realm entirely, instead using the laws of a more mature realm. Perhaps this was just one step in their plan to have a larger realm devour the crystal realm. For a moment Lex debated what to do. Although his tenet wanted to unravel this thing, he was almost certain that the moment he did so, someone would notice. Lex sighed one more time, but then acted according to his promise to himself. He conjured a piece of paper and wrote a small letter on it, describing the situation, as well as leaving a small formation on it that would teleport the reader to Lex's current location. Then he folded the paper to look like a paper airplane, and narrowed his eyes. Although he was getting used to the life and abilities of an immortal, it would take time. Right now he wanted to do something, but getting it to work perfectly would be slightly tricky, mostly because of the distance from himself. He spent a few minutes calculating, and then after making sure everything was alright, threw the paper plane in the air. It flew a small distance before teleporting away. Although the spatial coordinates for a lot of places might have changed, it was impossible for the coordinates for a place Lex was at a few hours ago to change. Within Cornelius' palace, the paper plane teleported in, and flew directly into the face of an unsuspecting guard. He flinched, but by the time he opened his eyes, the plane was gone. Cornelius, who noticed the spatial fluctuation, immediately pulled the letter to himself and opened it. His casual expression suddenly became serious, and he channeled his energy into the formation on the bottom of the letter, teleporting away. A few seconds later, he appeared standing next to Lex, who looked supremely irritated. But Cornelius, instead, turned his attention towards the massive deformity that had formed in the laws. "What the hell is this?" he said, his expression contorting from anger. Lex nodded as Cornelius left the cavern, looking at the twisting blob of laws. Although he decided to destroy it to sate his tenet, he was going to do it smart. He was certain that there were some traps laid around the place, as well as a way to mark him. He wanted to destroy everything without leaving a mark, so the best way to do that was to take plenty of precautions. Lex activated both his eyes, using the left one to study all the laws in his surroundings, while using his right one to create layers of protection around himself. At the same time, he even created a clone of himself in the mortal grade using a cloning technique, and used his tenet to bind the clone to himself, so it could stand in his place. Lex did not really think he needed so many precautions, but historically speaking, he always got in trouble because of his rash actions or ignorance. Now, even if resolving the abnormality in front of him might cause issues he could tolerate, he saw no reason why he had to bear them to begin with. In the distance, he heard the sounds of fighting, and the ground continued to rumble, so he guessed that Cornelius was already fighting. Not wanting to delay things anymore, Lex reached out with his tenet, while at the same time paying great attention to his tenet. This was the first time it showed a reaction, so he observed everything carefully through the lens of supremacy. He could see why his tenet had been aggravated. The way he saw it, a fragment of another realm was devouring the laws of the crystal realm while growing itself. Even as a smaller, weaker existence, it was exerting its supremacy over the crystal realm, and although that had nothing to do with Lex himself, it almost felt as if his tenet was provoked. After studying the abnormality thoroughly, Lex reached out to it and, boldly and directly quashed it. There was no room for subtlety in this matter, since the abnormality was an order of magnitude above things Lex should technically be dealing with. He was messing with the laws of two realms that were locked in a battle, and he didn't want to risk finding out the repercussions if something went wrong. So, in one go, he used the utmost strength he could muster, and tugged at the mutating laws, stopping them from working so that the laws of the crystal realm could break free. Lex genuinely expected more resistance, but it seemed like the abnormality was quite fragile to begin with. Having said that, the moment it was resolved, Lex felt like he had been locked onto by a vicious beast. Already expecting as much, Lex wasn't concerned. He summoned his clone and forcefully replaced himself with it, turning it into the target of the aim. Considering that the clone did not have the heavy protection Lex wound around himself, a dark red mark appeared all over his face, marking him. Just as more things were about to happen, the clone killed himself and disappeared. The red mark vanished, and the gathered forces were left without a target since Lex had already teleported away. After a few seconds, even the accumulated energy vanished, yet Lex did not return to check it out. He also wasn't interested in checking up with Cornelius again. He had sworn to avoid getting involved, and that's exactly what he was out to do. Although, watching how that one realm devoured another, and how that affected his tenet gave Lex some ideas. He dared not think too deeply, lest he trigger some tribulations. Even so, it gave him some perspective about tenets. It should have been fairly obvious, but it seemed that they weren't as straightforward as being tools with which to manipulate laws. There was more to them. As he continued to walk across the lifeless expanse, Lex couldn't help but wonder about it. In another corner of the crystal realm, a group of Hellions were alarmed by a sudden change. Chapter 13:20 Craven's passive abilities. What the hell happened? Yelled an Ifrit, its red bulging skin suddenly turning a darker shade. Its two long jagged horns suddenly caught on fire, providing the creature with a large, flaming crown, making it look even more daunting. The countless imps around it suddenly started running away, for even their fire immunity would not protect them from the heat of an Ifrit. I think you know what happened, responded a hellspawn, its body made entirely of red flames, with dark, molten rocks covering the surface of its body like armor. Someone finally caught on to our plan. It was bound to happen sooner or later. We should, instead, focus on the fact that the mark failed. Either the target is dead, or they somehow hid from the mark of Iblis. Do not say blasphemous things, held a banshee, her hair suddenly standing up as she looked at the hellspawn in fury, which only caused the hellspawn to facepalm. I'm working with idiots, the hellspawn murmured to himself. Focus up. This only means we need to accelerate our plans before they mount a proper defense, spoke Azura, his words causing everyone to fall into a hush. Even the craziest of Hellions knew not to mess with Azuras. Of all the Hellions, they may not be the strongest, but they were one of the most dangerous. It was as if, as a whole race, they required anger management classes. Unfortunately, due to their considerable strength, hardly anyone had the guts to tell them that. The Hellions began to discuss their plans, sitting atop a howdah strapped onto the back of a massive craven. All around them was a massive army, moving like a swarm across the landscape like shadows at dusk. In front of them was the massive border built by the crystal race dividing their lands. "Should someone go check up on who destroyed our setup?" asked the Hellspawn, hoping for a bit of forethought from its colleagues. "Sooner or later, they will all fall down," said the Ifrit. "What does it matter if we pick one out specifically?" The Hellspawn only sighed. "Listen up, I need to talk to Vinii. My name is Lex from the Midnight Inn, he should know about it. Can you tell me how to get in contact with him?" The monster trembled once more, though it was not just because of the fierce aura Lex was giving off. Vinii was a deity worshipped by all monsters. More importantly, he was obeyed by all monsters as well. His authority was total, and the only thing that surpassed their total devotion for him was their fear of him. Confronted by someone who dared name the deity directly, the very instincts that the monster had been born with started going off. If it had been anyone else, those instincts would have been telling it to attack like crazy. But since it was Lex, and the aura he was giving off was so scary, his instincts were telling him to not resist at all, and just help Lex reach the dark deity. Once there, the deity himself could take care of any and all concerns. "I cannot presume to know the location of the dark deity," the monster said truthfully. "I can only bring you to the warfront where the monsters fight. He may or may not be there." "That will do," Lex said. A small, white root emerged from the ground near Lex and touched his foot, all slowly and deliberately so as to not startle him, before they teleported away. It seemed like teleportation was much too common in the upper levels, but the truth was that not all teleportations were the same. Few could match how smooth and seamless Lex's own teleportations were, including the monster. It took them nearly a dozen seconds before they appeared at their destination, during which Lex and the monster both had to endure immense pressure from the teleportation itself. Fortunately, they both had tough bodies. They reappeared, just as the sea cave monster said, at the war front. As far as Lex could see, the ground and the sky were filled with either monsters of Craven. They fought mercilessly, making less use of the laws and spending more time ripping each other's bodies to shreds. They were fighting in complete darkness, as neither soul birds nor Frio birds would come close to such a battle, but that enabled the monsters even more. As numerous as they were, as powerful as they were, as dangerous as they were, the Craven were losing. But the monsters' victory was not without cost. The black slime which covered the Craven's bodies was just as insidious as Lex recalled, even at the immortal level. In fact, as Lex saw the fight, he noticed that the Craven did not actively make use of laws in the same way humans did, but each of their attacks were backed by certain laws. Their slime, too, was empowered by laws. It was as if everything worked passively for those disgusting creatures. The most horrendous part about the Craven immortals, however, was that their bodies were also constantly being acted upon by laws. As far as Lex could tell, their bodies were constantly in a state of healing, keeping them at the top of their game. With such absurd abilities, it was no wonder that the Crave were so difficult to fight. But while that was true for others, it was not so for Lex. While his eyes could see their strengths, it could also see their weaknesses, which is why he was confident in being able to take them out. Lex diverted his focus from them and onto the monsters. While the monsters were powerful as well, what Lex was truly interested in was their deity. He seemed to be out of sight. Lex could feel the fluctuations of divine energy in the distance. Chapter 13:21 Please delay. Flashes of light often dispersed the darkness of the battlefield, and large raging fires ate away at bits of the darkness as well. For immortals, it hardly mattered whether there was light or darkness, so their battles remained uninterrupted regardless of the state. Even so, more often than not, the Craven would try to light up the field. The monsters thrived in darkness, so there was no reason to allow them to be at ease. Yet there was one region where the darkness was exceptionally deep. No lighting flashed, no fires blazed, nor did any enchantments illuminate that region. In fact, even the laws of light seemed to shy away from it. The darkness was as old as the realm, as if it had seen the moment of the realm's birth, and had directly battled against the bang that created the realm. It was like a living malevolence, eating away not just light, but anything that was associated with it. There was no hope in the darkness, no courage or valor. There was only the cold, hopeless despair, and of course, in the depths of the seemingly living darkness, there was a monster. Even from far away, as Lex approached, he could sense it. Compared to the monsters that fought, compared to the ones born from darkness, to the ones that brought fear into the hearts of many, the monster in the darkness up ahead was a true, genuine monster. It was also a deity. Even from afar Lex could feel the overwhelming divine energy that radiated off the body hidden within the darkness, though ironically, despite being extremely rich, it was actually one of the weaker deities Lex had met. Compared to the likes of Ra and Sekhmet, this deity was a lot weaker. That did not mean it was actually weak, as Lex felt a great pressure on his body from even coming close to it. But Lex himself was no less of a monster. For a brief moment, as Lex entered the darkness, he was genuinely blinded. His normal vision failed, as did his spirit and soul sense. But his eyes were not normal, and Lex needed only to use his ability to see once again. At the same time, his affinity for divinity allowed him to use the thick amounts of divinity that filled the darkness for himself, acting similar to a live map. Lastly, a single, powerful heartbeat from his chest relieved some of the effects of the darkness on him. That is why, within the darkness, Lex had no trouble approaching the large black bird. Vinii, in his true form, looked much like a soul or Frio bird, except that it was pitch black. "I remember you," the dark deity said, turning his gaze to Lex. "That might not be the Hellions' only purpose. Back at the capital, I discovered their attempt to turn the laws of this realm into that of another realm entirely. Although I put an end to their attempts there, who knows where else they may have also made such attempts. In fact, I have reason to believe that using their methods requires a great sacrifice, or the death of countless beings, which is why they're exacerbating the war. The growth of the realm itself due to the death of countless immortals is just an additional benefit." For a moment, Vinii was silent. The bird narrowed its eyes as it tried to determine the veracity of Lex's claims. Lex could feel the surge in divine energy and dissipate into the air itself. After a while, the bird hissed. "It seems the guests have fooled us all along. Their claim that their goal to raise the capacity of the realm must have been a ruse so that the higher powers of the realm would silently consent to their actions while they plotted something else. Quite cunning. Quite cunning indeed. But young tavern keeper, it is still not time to attack the prince. The crystal realm is not as simple as many think it to be, and these outsiders will suffer because of it. Whether the realm becomes their stepping stone, or their bodies nourish the realm is yet to be seen. I request that for now, you delay your revenge. In exchange, I will personally reward you for your continued contribution to the crystal realm." Lex pursed his lips. He had been really looking forward to revenge. This was not a light matter. When the craven prince had attacked, Betty, the tavern's bouncer's wife, had a miscarriage. Although it was not the same as losing a child, Lex felt immense guilt and shame for allowing such a thing to happen. That was not the kind of thing he could just overlook for a reward. Except, looking at the black bird, the deity of darkness, or perhaps the deity of monsters, or maybe even both, Lex felt like it would not make this request lightly. After all, it too wanted to kill the craven prince. The massive war between the monsters and craven all around him was proof. "How long do you want me to delay?" Lex finally asked. "I cannot be certain. Just as the outsiders hide and plot, the citizens of this realm are not without their own plans. It is a delicate balance. I can, however, promise you that when the time comes, I can personally invite you to end this craven infestation with me once and for all." Lex took a deep breath, and then nodded. It was not easy to give up on revenge, even if it was temporary. "Your cooperation is appreciated. Allow me to give you your reward. I hope you will find it satisfactory." The darkness around them trembled, and then Lex felt it wrap itself around his body, holding it securely as they warped out of place. It was not teleportation, not exactly. It was not even moving from between the planes. No, they experienced some other kind of phenomenon, but whatever it was, Lex was no longer surrounded by war. The veil of darkness began to retreat into Vinny's body, as the bird flapped its wings a couple of times before landing. Lex looked around, and found himself standing on a stone bridge, built floating upon a serene lake in the middle of some mountains. Trees, plants, and flowers filled the surrounding mountains, while vibrant colored fish swam in the clear waters of the lake. It looked like they had arrived in some kind of sanctuary. Chapter 1322 How to Kill a Deity for Dummies. Up above, in the air, there seemed to be a sun illuminating the sanctuary, though Lex could tell it was artificial. The bridge they were on had statues of various birds on both sides facing each other every 20 feet, all leading up to a large, ancient temple that seemed to be covered in some kind of ivy. The air in this place was thick with divine energy, so much so that there was no spiritual energy present at all. This is a unique place within the crystal realm. The only way to enter here is to be brought in by one of the original deities, such as myself, Vinny said, walking down the bridge. Lex followed quietly, observing everything. Just as Vinny said, this place felt special, as if it were some kind of divine kingdom. In truth, I also have a motive of my own to bring you here, Vinny said, in a matter-of-fact way. You see, when the crystal realm was created, 5 beings were born, and held supreme power over all living beings, attaining their eternal worship, and so 4 of those 5 became divine. Only one disdained such power. At the time, young and ignorant, we mocked the one that refused. The power of deities is vast and versatile, and so for a time we rejoiced in our capabilities. It is only with time, exposure, and experience we learned of how limiting divinity can be. The bird opened the massive double doors of the temple, revealing that the building consisted of only a single hall, a massive skylight letting in the light from the sky. Spread around the hall, in equal distances, were 5 statues of birds, each one distinct and incredibly lifelike, not to mention filled with incredible power. At a glance, Lex easily recognized the statues representing Firen, the progenitor of the soul birds, Azel the progenitor of the Frio birds, and that of Vinny. Instead of statues, they looked like a perfect replica of the real thing, even radiating a bit of their elements. The remaining 2 statues caught his eye because of how unique and interesting they were. One of the birds was made entirely of crystal, and gave off an aura that vaguely reminded Lex of the crystal race. The last one, however, was a multicolored bird which was mostly brown, but had feathers containing each color in the rainbow. There was also a bit of funny history between them and dragons. While not completely willing to treat their bodies as treasures, dragons resented the fact that, objectively speaking, every bit of a phoenix's body was more valuable than a dragon's. As a reward for your cooperation, I would like to award you with one of my old feathers, Vinny said, sending a single, small feather Lex's way. He did not complain about its small size and just put it away. You said you had another motive for bringing me here, Lex said, looking at the black bird. He wanted more feathers. Specifically, he wanted 2 more. If he had a total of 3 phoenix feathers, he could keep one for himself, give one to Vera as payment for all the help she had given him, and then give the final one to Mary. But this was not the kind of thing he could just take. Indeed, I do. Your strength is adequate to complete certain tasks on my behalf in other realms. All of those tasks bring me one step closer to reverting to my original state, and so I propose a transaction. If you can help me complete my objectives, I can pay you back using my old feathers, and maybe even a few drops of my blood. Lex was intrigued. Although he claimed to have countless treasures on hand, even he would not say no to a phoenix feather. Who knows, he might be able to absorb it into his body and gain some benefits. I can agree to your requests if I find them to be suitable. I have a few requests of my own in the meantime. Since we are going to be cooperating, and might even be future colleagues, it's reasonable to help each other out. Vinny was silent for a moment, and then assented. What are your requests? You see, I have a couple of enemies who are deities, Lex said, thinking back to Ra and Sekhmet. I want to get a better understanding of how to defeat them once and for all. One deity, in particular, keeps surviving from all my attacks, and hides in the shadows even though I've supposedly even killed most if not all of his followers. Eliminating a deity is one of the most challenging tasks in all of existence, Vinay said with pride. That is one allure of becoming a deity. Killing followers and eliminating the associated religion is a way to weaken a deity, sure, but it is not enough to kill it. Followers and worshippers allow a deity to grow stronger, and at the same time, serve as the source of the deity's divine energy. But if you kill all the followers, the deity can just go and find new followers to replenish his energy, and keep them hidden. There are only two ways to kill a deity, as far as I know. In fact, I think a combination of both is likely the only way to get a real result. The first is that any and every deity must, in their religion, reveal a weakness or fatal flaw. The more powerful the deity, the more they can obscure the weakness, but they must never be without one. The laws of the universe do not support the existence of a deity that can claim to be all-powerful, omnipotent and omnipresent, perfect in every way. The more powerful deities obscure their weaknesses in stories of trials they overcame, and hide them among many such stories so that no one can know the true weakness. Even so, they must present their weakness within their religion. That does not, however, mean that their weakness will be common knowledge. In fact, though the story must be included in the religion, it is not mandatory that all must know it. As long as someone significant knows it, it will suffice. So finding a deity's weakness within their own doctrines is the first challenge. The second path to eliminating a deity is to extinguish their divine fire. Chapter 1323 How to Raise a Deity. Lex raised an eyebrow. Compared to the first, which was basically a scavenger hunt across a realm, and possibly more, the second way of killing a deity sounded too simple, but there was no way it could be so straightforward. After all, Vinay had just said that killing a deity was one of the most difficult things in the universe. What is divine fire? Lex asked, wondering if he could give it to Luther to absorb. His physique required him to absorb various kinds of fires. The more fires he absorbed, the more powerful his own would become, so absorbing a divine fire should also technically work, right? As long as it was technically still fire. To become a deity, one must use the accumulating divine fire in their body and light a fire using it. It is the single most difficult obstacle to becoming a deity. To achieve it, you need the purest divine energy, in copious amounts. That means you must have countless devoted followers, praying to you non-stop, providing you with the purest divine energy possible. If you don't have that, then you must wait countless years while accumulating divine energy, and then distill and purify it until it can be used to light a divine fire. Newborn deities must keep their divine fire within their bodies, but as they grow stronger, they can hide away their divine fire, which is the very source of all their power. If it is extinguished, the deity will die, but to extinguish it is very difficult, and the more powerful the deity, the more powerful the divine fire. After a certain level of strength, the divine fire itself becomes the deity, more than the deity's body, which means that if you try to extinguish it, the deity can and will use their complete strength in stopping you. But even if they didn't, extinguishing divine fires is extremely difficult, since it is powered from divine energy itself. Realistically, your best bet would be to take another deity and have them consume the divine fire. It's still not easy, and would require quite a fight, but it's still much easier than extinguishing the fire on your own. Just like how a divine fire is the source of a deity's power, a core is the source of a defiler's power. Those, too, are not easy to get your hands on. I will give you an entire guide on how to deal with defilers, and you can pursue it at your own leisure. I accept. I'll come find you when I do it. Just know that I am busy with other things as well, so I may not be able to deal with it immediately. My patience is extensive, Vinay responded. Do you mind if I ask you another question? Lex asked, as he pondered over something. I don't mean to belittle the difficulty of becoming a deity, but from your description, it sounds pretty easy to become a deity. I mean, if all you need are followers, basically anyone can just become a deity? Any immortal can brainwash mortals over a few generations, get a bunch of devoted followers and begin accumulating divine energy. In as little as a few decades, and at most a few centuries, they can become a deity. Vinay nodded. Yes, in essence, anyone can become a deity. In practice, it's a little harder, since lighting a divine fire is not so simple. For many who are weak, and have no hope of becoming stronger through conventional means, becoming a deity is a convenient route. But nothing in this universe is so straightforward. The crystal realm, too, was filled with thousands of deities in its early years. Until someone figured out that a deity can become stronger not only by spreading their religion and influence, but also by consuming other deities. In fact, not only do you gain more power, you can even inherit some of the powers of the consumed deity according to their religion, thereby enhancing your own. You see, creating your religion cannot be completely up to your whims, and must be grounded in reality. Consuming other deities is a shortcut. Lex gained a deeper understanding of deities, and their complex relationships with one another. No wonder religions always seem to be targeting one another. Not only was it a competition for worshippers, but the deities themselves could serve as nourishment for another. It only made sense. There was no path to power that was completely easy. Each path had its own risks and rewards. He just had to keep that in mind while he grew strong enough to kill Sekhmet, and eventually Ra. Chapter 1324 Raising Phoenixes. Lex also pondered the possibility of nurturing a deity of his own, but eventually dismissed it. As he grew in power, anything a deity was able to do, he would be able to do. As it was, even as an earth immortal, the scope of his power was incredible. Besides, Cassandra had told him not to step onto the path of the divine, and even Vinay, who had become a deity, seemed to be regretting it. There was effectively no purpose to nurturing a deity of his own. But then, his thoughts went into another direction. While he could not nurture a deity, a phoenix. So does that mean the other deities are all phoenixes as well? Lex asked, once Vinay handed him a phoenix feather, and they left the temple, returning to the battlefield. Yes, all 5 of us were phoenixes once. As it is, there is only one left now. So does that mean that all the soul birds are descendants of phoenixes? Descendants, yes. But that does not mean that they are phoenixes. At most, they merely have trace amounts of their bloodline, but it is almost certain that they will never become phoenixes. It is not so easy for a true phoenix to be born, one way or another. Got it. Well, I'll see you when I have the Defiler core, or if you're ready to act against the Craven Prince. The two reached an agreement, and Lex returned to the Midnight Realm. He had originally planned to send the battalion to the Crystal Realm as well, but the fight there was beyond their level. Although they needed to get more experience, it wasn't worth sending them to their doom. That's great. Listen, I'd like you to pay special attention to Sunny. I was just having a chat with one of Sunny's parents' friends, and I just found out that the poor bird is malnourished, which is why its bloodline is not waking up. That's unacceptable. As a member of the inn, Sunny should be thoroughly nourished, and achieve its full potential. The turtle paused for a moment, and used one of the vines coming out of its shell to rub its chin, as if thinking. You're right. I was thinking that little Sunny looked weak, but I wasn't sure. No wonder his flames can only burn weed and not the divine barbs off the ruse bush deity I planted. Wait, what? Lex asked, suddenly shocked. You planted a deity? How does that work? He scanned the inn but found no signs of growing deities. What was going on? Silly human, you cannot plant deities, the turtle said and looked at Lex as if looking at a child. I planted a rosebush that will grow a rose deity once it's mature. How else am I supposed to grow a garden greater than Eden if I don't even plant a few deity flowers? Wait, what? Lex asked once more, repeating his words. He had never been more confused. He just had a conversation with a deity who explained to him how deities were born. None of that had anything to do with gardening. And what was this about growing a garden greater than Eden? The only Eden he knew of was Eden Corp, and that was a company, not a garden. Silly human, do not trouble yourself too much. Thinking too much is not good for your kind. I saw a human the other day lose his hair on his head. Thinking too much must have caused him to shed his hair. No, wait, that's not what I mean, said Lex, his lip twitch returning. I mean, I just found out about deities recently. I learned that one becomes a deity by being worshipped. So how can you grow a deity from a plant? Silly human, that is only for beings who are not born deities. That does not include those who are naturally born deities. Besides, flower deities are not the same as regular deities, anyway. Don't worry about it. If the innkeeper were worried about it, he would have stopped me already. My garden will be amazing, just you watch. Chapter 13:25 Gigachad. Yes, the innkeeper surely has no reservations about this plan, Lex without a shred of shame or awkwardness. But you know, I can help out since I am the... Lex suddenly paused for the briefest of moments, though that minuscule gap was more than enough for him to have an entire epiphany. For so long, he had actually been weaker than many of the workers at the inn. For a very long time Anita and Kawain had been stronger than him, and though they were friendly enough, Lex knew that a single accident was all it would take to ruin everything. There were others, too, who were still stronger than him, such as Zagan, but more or less, Lex was finally the strongest person in the inn again. Zagan was meditating, or perhaps still undergoing his tribulation, so it would be a long time before he woke up. By then, Lex was certain he could reach the heavenly immortal realm. Either way, he had been feeling the drastic change his latest upgrade brought him for quite a while, but it was good to realize that the silent fear that had haunted him since he discovered the inn and the cultivation world, that he would encounter someone stronger and he would be squashed without a chance at resistance, was slowly lessening. Of course, Lex was far from being without equal. But he was getting there. One realm at a time, he was eliminating the number of beings in the universe that could threaten him. As an Earth immortal, was now somewhat fit to properly oversee the expansion and development of the inn, ensuring that it went in a very specific manner. Lex teleported away, at least satisfied that eventually he would have a phoenix on his hands. Sure, it was hard for one to be born, and even harder for something to evolve into a phoenix using only the bloodline. But would it still be hard if a sovereign willed it so? Lex doubted it. He reappeared deep in the territory of the inn. It would take years of travel for a mortal to walk this distance, and by mortal he meant a nascent-level cultivator, not a pure mortal. In front of him spread out a vast, open field, carefully tiled and taken care of. In front of him was a gigachad. A shirtless man with a body worthy of a professional bodybuilder used a simple hoe to plow the incredibly tough soil. Each action required an immense amount of barbaric, brute strength from the man, flexing and loosening his muscles with every obstacle he overcame. Despite being a cultivator, he was drenched in sweat with clear signs of fatigue and exhaustion apparent in his actions. Yet he did not pause for even a second, that is, until he noticed Lex. Straightening his back and lifting his hoe to rest on his shoulder, the gardener wiped the sweat off his brow as he observed Lex. He looked more like a barbarian warrior than a gardener, but then again, taming the wild and harsh lands of the Midnight Realm was a duty befitting the fiercest warriors. Even though the gardener was merely in the nascent soul cultivation realm, Lex did not underestimate him. The fact that his hoe weighed a dozen tons was more than enough to demonstrate the gardener's ferocious might. Lex, what brings you here? The gardener asked with a smile, though Lex sensed his hidden fears. For the most part, the gardener gardened inside separate minor realms so that he could unleash his art, but with the Midnight Realm being the ultimate canvas, how could he resist? He just had to garden there as well, which is why he found a place far away from everyone so that he could garden in peace. So far, it was going well. So far. Chapter 13:26 Gardens. It's good to see you too, gardener, Lex said, and took a look around the area. It was not farmland. No, the gardener had loosened the soil, planted berry bushes, weeded everything, sprinkled a few layers of daisies. He saw, hidden within the grass, vines which he recognized as potato vines. In the distance, he saw a few almond trees, covered in white flowers, and a few species of trees that grew crystals instead of leaves, also all white. It seemed like the gardener had a color theme going on. I wish I could say that this was a social call, but unfortunately it is not. I have something of the utmost importance to talk to you about. Gardens, the gardener said ominously, as if stating the topic of the conversation Lex wanted to have. From Lex, the gardener's gaze wanders away to the vast vista before him. His hands, calloused from years of toil, rest upon the shaft of his mighty hoe. You come with burdens that weigh upon your soul, he said solemnly, his voice suddenly hoarse, as if he had not drank water in days. I feel it in the air, in the tremble of the leaves and the whisper of the soil. The questions that bear heavy on your heart will change the very destiny of these lands. But know this, there is no graver matter in this world than the tending of a garden. Many, in their folly, speak of war, of conquest, of the might of steel and spell. But they know not the true peril that lies in the heart of the earth. For within the humble soil stirs a force both terrible and profound, and I do not refer to the bitter gourd planted near the inn. He went silent, though Lex noticed his grip around the handle of his hoe tighten. The gardener's jaw clenched, as he thought back onto the countless horrors he had experienced. The drama cat burst into tears, covering its eyes with its hand as if it was too ashamed to let its state be seen. The gardener bent down and placed a hand on its shoulder, as if giving it strength. Lex coughed, and then quickly began the conversation before more drama cats appeared. Where there was one, there would be many more just behind. I have heard that the turtle is planting a special garden where he is planting deity flowers. What can you tell me about it? You have come to the right person. I have spent much time increasing my understanding over the deep and endless path of gardening, and have learned many of its secrets. Did you know, Lex, that gardens are ranked? Not specifically, but I can imagine so. After all, a garden for a mortal and an immortal can scarcely be the same. No doubt, there are many levels between them as well, not to mention the many levels above them. The gardener nodded. Yes, just like the cultivation levels, gardens have levels too. There are gardens fit for mortals, for chi training cultivators, foundation cultivators, for the golden core and so on. There are, naturally, immortal gardens too. But what do you think is above an immortal garden? Would it be a Tao garden? Lex's expression suddenly went from lax to extremely serious. What had started out from a mere normal inquiry had gone on to touch levels of power he dared not tamper with. The more powerful he became, the more he understood just how vast the distance between the Tao-level beings and everyone else was. Even thinking about it. He was no longer as blindly arrogant as he once was, and had learned the necessity of caution. The Tao was not something he could ponder at his level. Chapter 1327 A Highway and a Stairway. For his own sake, Lex had to keep a healthy distance from all things related to the Tao. But if it was something that was literally heading straight for him, he couldn't really ignore it now, could he? I'm not sure. Is there even such a thing as a Tao garden? Lex asked. The gardener shook his head, and then continued to walk forward, leaving the drama cat behind. Actually, I have no idea if Tao gardens exist, but that's definitely not what happens. Let's pause a bit and talk about divinity and deities. Are you familiar with them? Yes, more or less, Lex said. I recently learned about how others can become deities, though I am not sure about how deities are born. The gardener nodded. Well, then you are probably familiar with the fact that the normal method for a deity to grow is to accumulate followers, and what the followers follow is not the deity directly, but the mythos he crafts in the form of a religion. The religions, too, must follow specific patterns and be limited by certain guidelines that the deities themselves are restricted by through their very existence. I'm sure you already know this, but most, if not all religions have the concept of heaven and hell, or at least a final destination for the good and the bad after death. Lex suddenly stopped. The question of what came after death was one that plagued every living being, and while Lex had searched for answers through the cultivation world, the consensus he seemed to discover was that no one actually knew what happened. While the deities proclaimed a final, eternal resting place, a paradise of some sort or the other, and in certain cases that actually managed to pull such a feat off for selected souls who died within their realms of influence, most cultivators believed that even deities did not know. Or at least that's what he understood from the books he got from the Infinity Emporium. Was he, at least, about to learn the truth from the gardener of all people? Was he the keeper of this grand secret? What I want to tell you is that both heaven and hell exist, though not in the fashion that deities portray them. When a garden surpasses the immortal realm, it does not become a Tao garden, but becomes what deities refer to as heaven. Whether it is the Garden of Eden, the halls of Valhalla, the field of reeds, or whatever else a religion proclaims, they all refer to actual gardens that genuinely exist in the universe. Of course, those gardens don't necessarily have anything to do with those deities. Instead, it's just that those places are used by deities as anchor points for karma. Lex once again heard terms he was familiar with. He himself had quite a few anchors linked to the Midnight Inn, and he had tried learning about karma, but it was so elusive. Why was it that his gardener knew more about these things than him? Perhaps it was because it was all linked to gardens? Can you tell me more about these heavenly gardens? What about hell? Are they also linked to gardens? The gardener shook his head. How could gardens be linked to hell? That's absolutely preposterous. I have no idea how hells are formed, but I can tell you more about the heavens, not heavenly gardens. Once a garden rises enough in rank, it becomes a heaven. This is one of those things the system won't let me talk about. The system? Why would it? No. No, wait a minute, I remember that the system likes to create environments to suit its guests. Don't tell me. Before Lex could even finish the sentence, the familiar sound of a new notification rang in her ears. New quest, the host has accidentally done something right, so don't do something wrong on purpose. Ensure the completion of the Midnight Heaven, and find a suitable entity to inaugurate its opening. Quest time limit, 1,000 years. Quest reward, new guest rooms. Picnic basket. Quest failure punishment, reduction of host's authority and privileges. 300 metric tons penalty. Remarks, stay away from apples. New quest, where there is a heaven, there must be a hell. Build the Midnight Hell and find a suitable entity to inaugurate its opening. Quest time limit, 1,000 years. Quest reward, new guest rooms. Sauna and hot tub upgrades. Suntan room. Quest failure punishment, reduction of host's authority and privileges. 300 metric tons penalty. Remarks, you need one highway and one stairway. Lex read the notifications, and actually breathed a sigh of relief. The 1,000-year deadline meant that even the turtle wouldn't achieve creating a heaven so soon. Lex was afraid that in a couple of years he'd have to face another invasion by yet another deity, or even more. With 1,000 years to prepare, Lex was confident that he would be more than strong enough to deal with any issues that might crop up. Or he'd already be dead. Either way, in the short term, this was no longer a concern. Lex turned his gaze towards Mary, who was looking at him innocently. So about that phoenix feather, she began with a grin. Chapter 1328 Divine Kingdom. Lex gave Mary a glare and she meekly stepped back and stuck out a tongue pointed at him. If I get more of them, I'll give you. For now, I will keep this one in case I need it. Now, can we focus on other things? What's an Elysian? Can you tell me? Lex had read many books and learned about countless races that existed within the origin realm, all from books he got from the Emporium. Yet the Elysians weren't one of them, likely because they had something to do with the heavens, and not the origin realm. I can't tell you. Oh wait, it seems like I can tell you, Mary said, sounding surprised herself. This is genuinely surprising. Then again, I guess we haven't had a nice, long question and answer session in a while. Maybe becoming an immortal has finally allowed you to learn a few things. Once, Lex used to get irritated that the system withheld information, but he now understood that as a mortal, learning too many secrets put an immense burden on his mind and his being. Sometimes, it was literally more dangerous than an actual enemy. Just like Hellions and humanoids, Elysians are another race group in the universe. I'll be quite frank with you, Hellions and Elysians both hate each other's guts, but often have that enemies to lovers deal going on between them. But both of them really hate all humanoids, so on the list of races to watch out for just for being a human, I would count them both. Mary flapped her wings and took flight, and while Lex pondered the implications of what she told him, she herself was quite curious about how much freedom she had been given to communicate with him. It was like a whole new era was opening up for the Midnight, and if she could truly begin guiding him freely. Why do they hate humanoids? Lex asked. It's because of devils and angels, Mary told him, suddenly feeling excited about sharing universal gossip. You already know that controlling major realms influences a race, raising its position in the cosmic ascendance spectrum. What you don't know is how. Much in the way you took control of a minor realm back when you were in the crystal realm, Tao Lords can take control of a major realm. Yet when that happens, it's not just the Tao Lord that gets the feedback, but his entire family, as well as his entire race. You've seen how devils transform into their alternate forms, right? And how angels can control divine energy? Well, both of these abilities are things their races didn't originally have. The devils took over one of the hells, namely Garvets, while the angels took partial control over a heaven named Eden, and thereby gained benefits for their races, benefits that originally belonged to Hellions and Elysians. Don't think that just because the angels only have partial control that they're weak. Based on the ongoing trend, it's only a matter of time before they claim total control over it. Interesting. Interesting. So all I'm hearing is that when I complete these two quests, building both a heaven and a hell within the inn, I'm going to piss off both the Hellions and Elysians. Excellent. Mary shrugged. Not necessarily. I think you should look more into the concept of heaven and hell. They don't necessarily need to cover the entire realm. I think, instead, if you have both heaven and hell inside the inn, you'll be on the path for a genuine divine kingdom. Now that, whops, looks like we found the limit of what I can say. So you should just be mentally prepared that a lot of them might start getting into relationships soon. While in itself that's a good thing, you've never really faced internal conflict within your workers before. But the addition of their partners who were not born of the system might just change that. Mary silently marveled at the amount of freedom she was suddenly given. This was just one of the things she had wanted to warn Lex about for a long time, but she had always been restricted. Now though, for whatever reason, she could. Where there are people, conflict is inevitable, Lex said dismissively. Delma has already discussed this with me, by the way. She's organized some classes to teach workers about foreign dating cultures, and I did a survey among the workers about their general sentiments. I don't think they will tolerate a partner who breaks the rules of the inn. Besides that, any arguments and disagreements they have can all be handled. We can't shy away from these little problems. Of course, since Mary had brought up the problem, Lex would give it more attention. But for now, he teleported to the flying city of glass which was currently over the massive lake behind Midnight Manor. The city was one of the more popular destinations among mortals, and was an even more popular spot for dates, not that that had anything to do with his purpose here. Lex had come here to find Giselle, who was sitting in a cafe having a meeting with an alien woman. She was a reptilian, which meant that although she could stand upright like humans, communicate and do everything else humans could, the scales and the long tails would always make them distinct from humans. Whatever their conversation was, Giselle paused when she sensed Lex's approach from the distance. He waved at them with a smile. Sorry, I hope I'm not disturbing anything important, he said warmly. I wanted to discuss something with Giselle. Is this a bad time? Both the ladies looked at Lex, though the reptilian lady scrutinized him more openly. Are you sure? She asked, with doubt in her mind. Positive, Giselle said, and turned to Lex. Were you aware that there are a number of bounties on your head? Oh yeah, from the dragons, Lex said with a nod. I'm pretty sure they might be revoked soon. I think we're on good terms now. The lizard lady sighed in disappointment. Chapter 1329 Silences. Wanted to claim my bounty, huh? Lex asked casually as he sat down. He did not even need to scan her through the system to sense her strength, as he could tell directly. She was at the peak of the Earth immortal realm, and was in no way a threat to Lex whatsoever. It felt nice to know that. Yes, Lias wanted to claim your bounty and use it in exchange for true dragon's blood to try and evolve into a dragon, explained Giselle. I was just explaining to her that doing so was not such a good idea. Can't help but agree with Giselle on this one, Lex said as he looked at Lias. I'm quite attached to my life and I'm not fond of giving it up. Plus, I'm notoriously hard to kill. Even the dragons have already tried and failed. If the reptilian lady had eyebrows, she would have raised them. Instead, she only looked at Lex like he had said something crazy. Do you have a bit of time? There's a few things I wanted to discuss with you. Giselle gave Lias a look, and her friend only groaned and got up. You two talk. I need to go get a drink anyway, she said before walking off. She looked quite depressed. From what Lex could tell, she really had given up on his bounty, which he hoped was true. It would suck if he had to fight a friend's friend. How can I help you? She asked, getting straight to the point. Lex, on the other hand, first erected a barrier around them to keep their conversation confidential before continuing. Just need to ask you a few questions about heaven, hell as well as getting my hands on a defiler core if possible. The silver-haired girl merely looked at him calmly, as if he had not just talked about a bunch of extremely delicate and confidential, as well as dangerous matters. So? What's the question? Let's start with heaven. Are you familiar with it? What are its requirements and restrictions? How big does it need to be? Stuff like that. Giselle continued to look at him evenly for a while, her thoughts completely hidden behind her perfect mask. Eventually, she spoke though. The smallest heaven that I know of only covers the size of a small garden, so like anywhere between 100 to 300 square feet. I'm not sure what borders exist to keep it in place, but apparently it's quite obvious when you enter or exit it. Anyone can feel it. I am not sure about requirements and restrictions, but it is naturally full of divine energy. Actually, I've heard that many powerful organizations and beings all nurture a heaven to act as a source for rare and valuable herbs that can't grow anywhere else. Lex did not exactly allow him to feel relief just yet. When you mean powerful organizations, you mean? Oh yeah. If it were the Innkeeper who wanted to do it, then why would I be worried at all? But the Innkeeper lets us do what we want, as long as we're ready to face the repercussions ourselves. In that case, if you wish, I can set up a meeting with an angel if you want. But I don't know how useful it will be. Lex thought for a minute, but dismissed the idea for now. No, that's fine. I'll look into it myself later. I have another thing I wanted to talk to you about. I need to get my hands on a defiler core, and you seem a lot more familiar with them than I. I did get a lead on a defiler in the Origin realm. Would you be interested in following it together? Lex, I know you have a strong background, but unless the Innkeeper is willing to take action, or some other Dao Lord, I highly recommend you avoid any defilers in the Origin realm. Facing prophanites and facing a genuine defiler are not the same thing. If you truly need to get your hands on a core, then I would suggest looking for another realm where the cultivation level cap is closer to your own level. Are the defilers there so strong? Lex asked, genuinely curious. He was under the impression that much like the Crystal Realm, all of the original defilers from the Origin realm had been wiped out. The whole reason that the Henali was not paying so much attention to them was because they should have been weak. Was his assessment wrong? But if that were so, wouldn't the Henali have worked harder to eliminate them? It seemed, for whatever reason, anyone who knew anything about defilers wanted to kill them. Defilers are one of the most insidious existences in the universe. In general, it is always best to assume that they are much stronger than they appear to be. Even I only dare to face prophanites in the Origin realm. Lex could not help but remember that it wasn't that she dared to face prophanites, but that they kept coming after her for some reason. But whatever that reason was, since she hadn't shared it herself, he wouldn't pry. Lex sighed. Well, if you find a lead on a defiler, or even a core, do let me know. Giselle just nodded, and Lex dismissed the barrier around them. Aren't you planning on going back to the Champions tourney by the way? That's still going on, as far as I know. I bet there's a lot more treasures for you to hunt. Oh, you have no idea. But I have a few more months before I enter the next level, so I am using that time to train as much as I can. Lex suddenly felt an irresistible urge. Although he had just been telling himself not to get involved with others' problems anymore. By the way, if you don't mind me asking, is there a special reason you need so many treasures? Maybe I can help you out with something. This time when Giselle suddenly went silent, Lex could finally read her emotions. She was considering his proposal. If it were anyone else she would have dismissed the suggestion, but Lex had proven himself to be quite durable. Maybe, just maybe, he might even be able to survive helping her out. Chapter 13:30 Clear Schedule. Giselle entertained the thought for a moment, but dismissed it quickly enough. There was no reason to risk it. Thank you for the offer, I will keep it in mind, she said politely. If you truly wish to assist me, then perhaps you can keep an eye out for a few items I'm in search of but have no leads on. If you find any information on them, you can just inform me of it and leave the retrieval to me. Sure, why not? Lex said nonchalantly, sensing that she wanted to keep a distance between them. I come across a wide variety of things in my line of work. Just give me the list and I'll keep my eye out. Truthfully, Lex was quite confident in being able to find whatever she needed until he saw the list. It did not help that he had no idea what some of the items were, and while he understood what some of them were, had no idea how to find them. Also, please do not make use of information-gathering organizations or anything of the sort to search for these. Just the knowledge that someone might be looking for these items itself might lead to trouble. Lex raised an eyebrow and looked back at the list. Quintessential sand? Journal 6 of Matriarch Parween? Cotton eyes? Ruins of the Eldrum Pantheon? These were only some of the items on the list that Lex could vaguely understand what they might be. Is it alright if I look up information on these things myself? I must admit, I'm not familiar with some of these. Giselle hesitated for a moment, as if thinking about it. If you must, then it's best if you only look into one, or at most two items. Individually, these mean nothing, but if you look into them all and someone draws an association between them, then it might mean trouble for you and I both. Got it, so mysterious background and backstory. Giselle was really living an interesting life. Fine, in that case, if I happen to come across details of any of these items, I'll try to contact you. Likewise, if you run into a lead on defilers or defiler cores, then you know where to find me. Giselle nodded, and just like that they came to an understanding. Lex couldn't help but feel that their exchange had been somewhat lacking. But there was no point in dwelling on it now. There was nothing really left to discuss, and since Lex interrupted her get-together with Lias, he excused himself so that they could continue with whatever they were doing. A few moments after he left, Lias returned and sat back opposite to Giselle. Vera only smiled and took the bag without any formality. No problem. By the way, I had another vision. If you have any plans to visit any angels coming up, you might want to delay them for a while. Your popularity with angels after Lover's Island has shot up quite a bit, and it might actually become troublesome for you if you approach them anytime soon. Lex was confused by Vera's statement. What did Lover's Island have to do with angels? He did not believe for a second that he was some heartthrob that angels would suddenly find themselves infatuated with him. He was completely ignorant of the fact that how easily he had resolved Thaliel's cursed wings was borderline miraculous, which had made angels of all levels keep an eye on him. In fact, the only reason he hadn't been swarmed by angels in the first place was because of the countless devils that filled the inn. Inadvertently, the inn had become a place that angels wanted to avoid just because of how much the devils loved going there, thereby saving Lex from a great headache. As it happened, the angels were spending a lot of time doing research on Lex's relationship with devils, trying to come up with ways to distance him from them so that he may come closer to them. Without knowing it, he had become just one more reason why angels and devils seemed incapable of getting along. Lex could not think of the reason why he might want to avoid angels, but he knew better than to question Vera. So far, she hadn't led him astray. Vera dear, why don't you invite your friend in, said Christine, who suddenly appeared behind her daughter. Christine was a mere mortal in the golden core realm, yet her gaze gave Lex chills. It was the gaze of a mother looking for a son-in-law. Fortunately, before Lex could make an excuse to leave, Vera just slammed the door shut. Even though the houses in the inn had perfect sound insulation, through his system, Lex couldn't help but peer in to see what was happening. Vera was once again fighting her mother, telling her that she was going to marry an Olin no matter what. Her mother, on the other hand, had other ideas. Lex made himself scarce. Although he was not afraid of combat, this was one fight he did not want to get involved in. "All right, Mary, it looks like my schedule has opened up," Lex said, returning to his office. "We can put the matter about heaven and hell on the back burner for now, although we should make a list of devils we can consult about how to make a hell. Something tells me 1,000 years to make a heaven or hell is a little short. But that's not our first priority at the moment." "What is our first priority?" she asked, still in her angel costume. "Well, I think it's time I negotiate a few things with the system again. We're going to be changing how the Midnight Inn works from now on."